Oh, goodness. Never mind, eh? Hey, everybody, you have joined us, me, obviously, and Emma Wallis and Julie Cohen on the third reading block of today. So we're going to hear from Julie first. Go for it.
Thank you. I think my dog stopped barking now. I hope, or it'll set all the other dogs off too. I'm going to be reading from my novel Spirited, which is out now in hardback, ebook, and audio. And it's a Victorian novel set around the idea of ghost spirit photography. And the main love relationship in the book is between Viola, who is an amateur photographer, who is a vicar's daughter and is very naive, and who is married unhappily to her childhood sweetheart, Jonah, and Henriette, who is a devious spirit medium and very charming. And the bit I'm going to read to you is from quite near the end of the book, and it's after, the morning after, Henriette and Viola have spent their first night together. So it's a breakfast table scene. At breakfast, Henriette was careful not to take the seat at the head of the table. It sat empty between them as Viola poured them each coffee and Henriette watched her. A great transformation had happened to both of them. This morning they had woken early in each other's arms and exchanged kisses and pleasure before the sun was fully risen. Now, though, Viola was pale and timid, where last night she had been rosy and bold. Henriette remembered far too clearly how easy it was for a maid to learn an employer's secrets, so she waited until the maid Alice had left the dining room and her footsteps had retreated to say quietly, "What worries you, Viola?" Viola screwed up her eyes and whispered, "What do the servants think? We spent last evening in my bed together." "It's perfectly reasonable," Henriette said, reaching for the toast rack. "Mr. Worth has been called away suddenly, and you didn't wish to be alone, so I, your friend, stayed the night. After all, that is what happened. But do you think they can tell what we did?" Henriette could tell. Viola's lips were pink and swollen from kisses. There was a pliability about her body that had not been there before. She was nervous now, but even in her discomfort, there was a knowledge, a sureness, a certain languid satisfaction that couldn't quite be dispelled by manners or formality or fear. It was quite extraordinarily beautiful. Henriette couldn't take her eyes off her. She wanted to take her hand and lead her upstairs again, forget appearances and deception, relax back into that world that contained only the two of them. "Are you sorry for what we did?" Henriette asked. "I didn't even know that it was possible," Viola said. "I looked at you while we were swimming and I thought about your body, but it never crossed my mind." "Selfishly," Henriette said, "I'm glad that it has now." "We should have taken off the bed sheets," said Viola, biting that swollen lip. "You have only to look at them to..." Henriette buttered a slice of toast and put it on Viola's plate. "They will suspect nothing," she said. "They may see, but they don't observe. Most people are far too conventional to see two women together as anything more than friends. It's illegal for men to lie with men, and immoral for a married woman to be with a man who's not her husband, but there's no law about women. Women loving each other don't even exist." "Men do that to each other?" Henriette couldn't help but laugh at Viola's astonished expression. "Oh, you are a perfect vicar's daughter." "Other people do that? Other women? What we did?" "They must, I've heard of it." "Have you done it before?" Viola's face turned from pale to bright red. "No." "Have you wanted to?" "There was a woman once who I think I loved. I never touched her, but I loved her." "Was it the woman in the photograph?" Henriette nodded. "How did you know her?" Henriette lifted her cup of tea and noticed, almost dispassionately, that her hand was shaking. She put down the cup. "I worked in the same house as her. She was the governess, and I was a housemaid." Viola stared. "How long ago was this?" "Years. Madame hardly noticed me. I can't think that she cared about me, but she saved me once, and I never stopped thinking about her, or about another girl," she added, though she surprised herself by saying it, "a girl called Jane. We shared a bed, and she always made me feel safe." Do you know what happened to her? No, perhaps she's still alive, married, with a house full of children. I've never told anyone about this. About the love or about being a servant? My husband knew I'd been a servant. He didn't care. He helped me hide the fact. Viola leaned her elbows on the tablecloth. You've loved so many times before, Henriette. Madame, Jane, your husband, you're so lucky. But none of these were anything like Viola, with her elbows on the table. Viola, breathless and eager, curious and tender, modest and frank. Viola, who kept her eyes open at the peak of her pleasure, seized Henriette's head to kiss her, who had no fear of daylight, who tasted of sweet clover and seawater, who fell asleep curled into Henriette, hand tucked inside hers.
Ah, that's cute. Lovely. So we have our first question. Well, it's a comment and a question. Emma Nichols says, Julie, I've read this book twice and it has so much breadth and depth. Where did you get your inspiration for the story?
I did way back years ago, I did a postgraduate degree in fairies in Victorian literature. So I am obsessed with Victorian literature, for one thing. And part of my degree was about the Cottingley fairy photographs, which you may have heard of, yeah. And I was obsessed by that and how the faces of the girls, women were framed in that and what it said about femininity and childhood. And because of that fascination, I became fascinated with spirit ghost photographs. And I wanted to have a story about death and loss and grief, but also about forbidden love and longing. So that was the inspiration.
Oh, amazing. Cool. So what kind of research did you do? We are going to talk about research a lot, I think, this weekend. How did you do the research? Which places did you go to find out about the Victorian history that you were writing about?
Well, it's set on the Isle of Portland and in Weymouth, so I spent quite a bit of time there looking at all the landscape there. I did a lot of reading of books, obviously, of novels and research books, you know, about spirit photography or about spiritualism in general, about photography. I took a course in how to do wet plate collodion photography. I learned how to do that and made some tintypes, which was fantastic. I've been to a spiritualist church and I've been very interested in spiritualism for a long time. And I think the thing that helped the most was going to the local archives and finding out. In fact, that passage right there was where Henriette says, between women, it doesn't exist, actually came from a talk that I did at the Reading Archives about queer history through the archives. And they were mostly looking at queer history through prison records, which were all men who had been jailed for indecency. And that was the only record they could find of you know, queer people in, you know, queer everyday people in the 19th century. And, you know, there were no women at all. So that is where that came from. Looking at newspapers, prison records, census records, things like that.
Right, are you ready? We're gonna go live. Do you ever wish that you could kind of rewrite history into a book so that it wasn't quite as invisible as it actually was?
Well, that's the point, isn't it? To when you're writing a book, especially about people who don't, and I wanted to make sure that Henriette was, even though she's a famous spirit medium, she was a maid. And those people, again, didn't have a voice and, you know, weren't writing about their lives. And so I wanted the invisible people to have a voice in my book about ghosts.
So we're going to hear from Julie. And how much of, so would you class it as historical romance, or is there some fantasy? Would you use that phrase in it because of the ghost photography and things like that? I suppose it depends how much you believe in ghosts, isn't it?
There are real ghosts in it, although they're not viewpoint characters. The photographs of spirits are real. Earlier I was talking about the fact that I took a photography course and I found out that my plot didn't work. And that's because originally the plot was that the ghosts weren't real, that they'd all been faked by Henriette. But it turns out that that couldn't happen the way I wanted it to. So I was like, oh, well, whatever, I'll put real ghosts in it. So it does have real ghosts in it. It's not really a romance that is genre romance, although it has several love stories in it, because it doesn't follow that structure. It's different, and it has lots of other things in it. There's quite a bit about the Indian Rebellion, and there's quite a bit about female emancipation and things like that. So, and a lot about photography. So it's more, I call it a literary commercial crossover novel, a book club novel, but a historical novel that has little bits of lots of genres in it.
A good mixture then. A bit of everything for everyone. Emma, come back. Have you got any questions for Julie?
Let me unmute myself. There we go. So I think before you said you write lots of different genres, and I was wondering, how do you decide what's going to be the next genre that you're going to start working on?
Screwed up her eyes and whispered, "What do the servants think?" I usually have conversations with my editor and my agent. This one was different. So I actually wrote this book when a couple of books ago I wrote a book called Together, and there was some problems about it being published. My publisher wanted me to change the ending, and I didn't want to change the ending. So I pulled the novel, I left my publisher, I paid back all my advance, which was my salary for the year, and then I found another publisher. But while it was happening, I was like, oh, screw it. I'm just going to write a Victorian lesbian love story under a different name and be someone else.
Why wouldn't you?
Exactly, right? Of course you would. So this one ended up getting published by my new publisher, but originally it was going to be under somebody else's name.
Why did you decide to do it under your name in the end?
My agent and editor said, yeah, why don't we publish this? Because even though it's set, most of my novels are set in present day, it still is. They say, and I think it is, it's recognizably one of my novels. It has the same sort of concerns, it has, the language is different, because obviously they're in 1858, but it has the same sort of concerns, the same sort of breadth, the same sort of relationships that I would have in my contemporary novels. So there's a continuum and a moral for a married woman. My next novel should be contemporary, there's no law about women, because I spoke with my agent and editor about it, and they said, no, if you write another historical, you're going to be pinned as a historical author, and you're not. Help but laugh. So write a contemporary one, and then maybe later on in the future write another historical. Other people do that? Other women? What we did?
Emma Nichols is asking questions. She wants to know whether loss is a theme of your work generally.
No. Have you wanted to? Definitely. There was all of my books. Who I think I loved. You know how you come back once you've written more than one book, you just keep on coming back to the same theme over and over and over, and you revisit it, because those are the themes that reverberate with you. And I've written over 25 novels now, and most of them have some sort of theme of loss in them. I worked in the same house, but you know how you cope with loss through loving, and I think that especially if you're writing romance or romantic fiction, loss is part of love. I can't think that there's no love that lasts forever. Once, and I never stopped when you fall in love with someone, you know that eventually you will lose each other. And I think that's part and parcel of what makes us human, is that we can care so much about something that is impermanent. No, perhaps she's still alive, married, with a house full of children.
And I think there's lots of different types of loss as well, aren't there? You know, there's lots of roles, there's lots of pets, there's lots of
my husband knew I'd been a servant. He didn't care. He helped me hide the fact. Loss of identity, loss of a relationship, loss of people, loss of status or power or money. Madame, Jane, your husband.
Definitely. Are there any other things that crop up?
But none of these were anything like Viola. With love. On the table. I always write about love. Breathless and eager. And I often write about identity. So who am I? What is my place in this world? Eyes open those are the three things that crop up the most. You know, some people just have, that's the interesting thing about different authors, is you can have a story which is really similar, like sorts of characters or tropes or conflict, but because their themes and what they care about are different, the story is going to be different. And I love that.
Ah, that's cute. Yeah, that is cool. Right, shall we move on to Emma Wallis?
So we have our first question.
She can do her reading.
Well, it's a comment on a question.
Okay.
Emma Nichols says, Julie, I've read this book twice.
So I'm going to be reading from, this is my debut novel. It's called This Is Not a Love Story. It's a contemporary fiction. It is not a genre romance.
So I am obsessed
I'm going
with
to read
Victorian
you
literature for one thing.
a bit from,
And part of my degree was about the Cottingley Fairy photographs, which you may have heard of, yeah. And I was obsessed by that, and how the faces of the girls, women, were framed in that, and what it said about femininity.
When she opened the curtains that morning, Scarlett was sad to see the rain. She liked autumn with its crisp air and brown and red leaves which crunch
and I wanted
underfoot.
to
But she'd learned to tread carefully on the wet pavements when the leaves turned to mush. Today she had her induction for the library. They'd been in the library building yesterday for their computer clinic, where they'd been given the email address and passwords that they would use to log onto the university network. The computer rooms were in the basement, and one large room held 50 computers and a bank of printers. Then there were several smaller rooms which held 20 computers each, which would normally be booked for computer-related classes. Her course didn't have many of those, but she would have to do a research project, including quantifiable data processing in the second year. The main computer room was open from 6 to midnight for the students who wanted to study on campus around their lectures and seminars. It was staffed by final year students in red polo shirts. The library itself opened at 8 and closed at 8, and was staffed by a mixture of librarians and student helpers. The windows of the library were fogged up by everyone's wet clothes when Scarlett arrived with Jessica, her induction time slot buddy.
And I think the thing that helped.
It seems like everyone's ducked inside to escape the rain, Jessica said, trying not to let her coat drip onto the floor.
Passage right there.
My induction sheet says meet at the inquiry desk.
Between women.
Is that on the main floor?
Actually came from a talk that I did at the
I think
Reading
so.
Archives
Scarlett looked around.
about queer history.
This is the
through
main
the archives,
floor, right?
And they were mostly looking at queer history through
when they pushed
prison
through the
records,
entrance barrier from the lobby into the library, Jessica's face brightened, and she waved to someone over Scarlett's shoulder.
And that
I
was
see
the
someone
only
who can
record
direct
they could
us.
find of
Scarlett turned to see one of the
queer
librarians
people in,
waving back.
Queer
Unlike
everyday people.
the student helpers who
in
wore
the,
blue polo
19th
shirts,
century.
the librarians wore their own
there were no
clothes with
women
blue
at all. So
lanyard
that is
around their
where
neck.
that came from. Looking
The
at
woman came around the
newspapers,
circulation desk to
prison
greet
records,
Jessica, and Scarlett was
census
surprised to see
records,
the
things like
terrier in the
that.
purple coat walking next to her. As they got closer, she could see the coat said,
that you could
"Don't
kind of
distract me,
rewrite
I'm
history
working."
into a book.
When the
so that
librarian
it
stopped,
wasn't
the dog
quite
stopped
as
and sat next to her.
invisible as it
Scarlett,
actually
this
was.
is Amy.
Well,
I met
that's the
her when we
point,
were trying to
isn't
get Kemi's
it?
rug home.
When you're writing a book,
Jessica spoke to Scarlett, but
when you're
faced
writing a
Amy.
book, especially
And she,
about people
as she
who
spoke,
don't,
she used her
and I
hands in
want to make
fluid
sure that
movements that
Henriette
Scarlett
was,
recognised as sign
even though
language.
she's a famous spirit medium,
Hello,
she wasn't
Scarlett.
made.
Amy had a slight
those people,
inflection
again,
to her
didn't
voice,
have a voice,
and Scarlett assumed this came
and,
from
you know,
learning
weren't
to
writing
speak by
about
watching other people's
their
lip and
lives.
tongue movements
And
rather
so
than
I
by
wanted
sound. As she
the
spoke, she gave a brief wave
invisible
and then
people
touched her little
to have
fingers
a-
together,
have
like
a,
she was giving herself a pinky promise.
voice
A
in
feeling
my
of
book
panic
about
crept
ghosts.
unbidden into Scarlett's chest. I'm
And
sorry, I
how
don't know any
much
sign
of-
language,
Would you class
she blurted,
it as
embarrassed
historical
that she
romance,
didn't know
or is
how to
there
communicate with
some
this smiling lady.
fantasy? Would you
That's
use
okay,
that
I lip read.
phrase
Just be sure
in
to
it?
face me. Amy tapped
Because
the
of the
badge pinned
ghost
to her lanyard, which had a
photography and
picture of a
things
hand
like that? I
cupping an
suppose
ear and the
depends how
words,
much you believe in
"Speak
ghosts,
clearly
doesn't
and
it?
face me," printed on it.
There are
Of
real
course, I
ghosts
can
in
do
it,
that,
although they're
Scarlett said
not
with
viewpoint
relief.
characters.
Jessica, perhaps you could teach me
photographs
some
of spirits
signs.
are real. Earlier I
Scarlett
was talking
watched,
about
captivated by
the
the way
fact that
Amy
I
and
was-
Jessica
I
communicated
took
with their
a,
hands and facial expressions.
photography course.
She
and I
felt like
found
she
out
was
that
missing
my
out on
plot
something
didn't work,
important,
and that's because
but
originally the
not
plot
like she was being
that the ghosts
excluded.
weren't real.
On the contrary,
They'd
the
all been
others kept
faked
up
by
the verbal
Henriette.
part of the conversation,
But
so
it
she could
turns out
follow
that
what they
couldn't
were saying.
happen the way I wanted it to.
Ashamed,
So
she
I was like,
twisted
oh well,
the strap
whatever.
of
I'll
the
put little
bag.
ghosts in it.
She
So it
realised,
does have
without
real ghosts
Jessica's
in it.
knowledge, she
It's
would have
not
just said
really a
hello to
romance,
Amy and then awkwardly
that is
excused
genre
herself,
romance, although
not
it has
knowing how to have a
several love
conversation with
stories in
someone
it
different from
because
herself.
it doesn't follow that.
As they chatted,
that
she
structure.
relaxed into the conversation.
It's different, and it has
Jessica
lots of
asked
other
Amy
things
how
in it.
long
There's
she'd
quite
had
a
her
bit
hearing
about
dog.
the Indian Rebellion.
"She's adorable," Jessica
and
motioned
there's
to the
quite a
little
bit
dog and
about,
touched 2 fingers to her forehead.
Female
"What's her
emancipation
name?"
and things like
"This
that.
is Peggy.
And
She's
a
the
lot about
Lakeland Terrier."
photography. So
On hearing
it's
her name,
more-
Peggy
I
popped her
call
head
it a
up,
literary,
big brown eyes looking
commercial
eagerly up at her
crossover
mistress.
novel, a book
But Amy
club
made a
novel,
subtle gesture and she
historical
laid down again.
that has
She's
the
very
limits
well
of lots of
behaved.
genres
What
in
else
it.
is she trained to do? Jessica asked.
A good mixture then.
She alerts me
A
to the
bit-
sound
a bit of
like
everything
fire
for
alarm,
everyone.
the phone, the doorbell,
Emma,
or someone
come back.
calling my name. I'm sorry.
Have you got any
Scarlett
questions
blushed
for
before
Julie?
she asked what she was sure was Let a me stupid unmute myself. question. There we go. I'm sure this is a really ignorant question, but why does she need to tell you that the phone is ringing? How do you decide She felt so embarrassed and unworldly. the next Her mother was more likely to pull her away from anyone who wasn't just like them. Marie had always been obsessed with surrounding herself
I usually
with,
have
as she would
conversations
say,
with my
the
editor
best
and my
people.
agent.
As a child, Scarlett
This
wasn't
one was
allowed to play with the
different. So I
children who
actually
lived
wrote
next
this
door
book
because their dad was Jamaican.
when a
Looking
couple
back
books
now,
ago,
Scarlett
I had
recognised it for what it was.
wrote a book called Together,
Small-mindedness,
and
bordering
there
on
was
racism.
some problems about
Even
it being
then,
published. My publisher
when
wanted
she didn't
me to
have the
change
words
the
to
ending,
express
and
how
I
she felt,
didn't want
it
to
had
change
made
the
her
ending.
feel
So I
uneasy.
pulled the novel.
Unfortunately, her mother
I
was
left
her
my
only point of
publisher.
reference
I
for
paid
social
back all my
cues.
advance, which was
Marie
my salary
sculpted
for
her
the year,
daughter as an effigy
and
of her own beliefs.
then I found
I can
another
just imagine
publisher.
what
But
Mum would say
while
about
I
Amy.
was while it was happening, I was
I
like, oh,
used
screw it. I'm
to
just going to
use
write a
the text phone
Victorian
system,
lesbian
but that was so slow.
love story
Now
under
I
a different
mostly
name and
use
be
video
someone
calls
else.
like FaceTime.
You?
I feel so
Exactly,
lucky
right?
to be
Of
living
course,
in a
of course
time
you
when
will.
we have so many
So,
communication technologies.
so this one ended
Not
up
long
getting
ago, my
published
deafness
by
would have
my new
completely
publisher,
isolated me.
but
She patted her
originally it was
pocket
going
in
to
the
be
universal action
under
of
somebody
looking
else's
for
name.
her phone and said,
What
when I
did
use
you
my
decide
mobile, I
to
can feel the
do it
vibration
under
alert
your
if it's
name
here in my
in the
pocket,
end?
or if I'm wearing my
My agent
smartwatch.
and editor said,
But if I leave it in my
yeah, why
coat
don't we
or on the
publish
table,
this?
Peggy will come and tell me if
Because
it's ringing.
even though
At
it's
work,
set,
there's normally
most of my
someone else
novels
to
are
answer
set
the
in present
phone.
day.
But I have video
It
conferencing on the
still
computer, so
is,
faculty members can talk to me
they
about
say, and I
research
think it is,
inquiries.
it's recognizably one of my
Wow,
novels.
I never would
It
have
has
thought
the same sort of
what a difference something like FaceTime would
concerns.
make
The same, it
someone's
has
life.
the language
That's
is
wild.
different.
That's
because
right.
obviously
There are
they're
so
in
many things we use
1858.
every day that were originally
But
invented as
it
solutions
has the
to
same sort of
people with
concerns, the same sort
disabilities.
of breadth, the same
Did you
sort
know
of
the first
relationships
typewriter,
that I
the
would have in
precursor to the
in
modern
my
keyboard, was
contemporary
invented in the
novels?
early
So
1800s for an
there's
Italian
a
countess who
continuum
was blind.
on that.
It was so
My
she
next
could write
novel
private
should
letters
be
without having to dictate them
contemporary,
to another
I
person.
think,
Also,
because I spoke with
audiobooks
my
were first
agent and
invented
editor
for
about it, and they
soldiers who
said
lost
no.
their vision because
If
of
you write
mustard
another
gas attacks in
historical,
World
you're
War
going to
One.
be pinned as a
That's
historical author,
amazing,
and you're
Scarlett
not.
said.
So
Amy's passion for the topic
write a
was evident
contemporary
as
one,
she
and then
spoke.
maybe
I wish I could find
later on in the
something that
future
I
write
was that
another
passionate
historical.
about.
Emma Nichols is
that sounds really interesting.
She wants to know whether loss is a theme.
So,
of your work,
it's a
generally.
work of fiction, but it's not a romance.
Definitely.
That is
Definitely.
right.
All of my books.
So is there
you know how you come
any
back
kind
once
of
you've
love
written more than one
interest-y type
book, you just
thing in
keep on
it
coming
at
back to the
all, or
same
is it
theme
just-
over and over and over, and you
So-
revisit it because
I don't want to
those
give
are the themes
spoilers
that
away because
reverberate
I
with
don't
you.
want to spoil
And
it
I've
for anyone
written
that
over
doesn't read
25
it,
novels now, and
hasn't read
most
it
of
yet.
them have some sort of theme
but
of loss
there
in them.
Is
But
women loving
you know
women
how you cope with
stuff
loss
in it.
through,
There are some sex
through
scenes
loving,
in it,
and I
but
think that especially if you're writing romance or
not a
romantic fiction,
romance.
Loss is part of
Fair
love.
enough.
Not a love story. The
There's no love
title
that
isn't
lasts forever.
ironic, but perhaps it's meant to be.
When you fall in love
thinking
with
it's
someone,
ironic.
you know that eventually you will lose each other, and I think that's part and
H.D.
parcel
Williamson had a similar
of what
issue with
makes us
Pink, didn't she?
human,
When
is that we
like
can
this, people thought it
care
was a
so
romance,
much
but
about
it wasn't,
something
and it
that is
literally didn't say
impermanent.
anywhere that it was romance. And yeah, people complained, and she was like, "But it's not a romance."
And
It
I think
doesn't
there's
say
lots of
it
different
is.
types of love
as
as
well,
well,
aren't
aren't
there?
there?
You know,
definitely
there's
wrote
lots
it
of
before
roles,
I
there's lots
knew
of
about
pets,
genre
there's lots
rules
of
and
yeah.
the expectations
So,
of readers
yeah,
and things.
it
So
is a big theme.
hopefully
Loss
people
of
will give it a
identity,
chance
loss
and
of
Yeah,
it will
definitely.
be well
relationship,
received
loss
for
of
what it
people, loss
actually
of
is rather
status
than
or
what
power or
people
money.
think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Definitely.
Emma
Are there any
Nichols is
other,
back. She has a question.
I am not.
in your books.
Emma says, Emma,
Love. I
you tackle
always
some
write
really
about love.
tricky issues in your work, and you do so beautifully.
I often write
How
about identity.
challenging
So
are they
who
to
am I?
write?
What is my place in this world?
I think
those,
it depends
those are the three
on kind
things
of
that crop
what the
up the
issues
most.
are,
You know,
and
some
if
people
they're
just
things
have.
that you
That's the interesting thing about different authors is you can have a story which is really similar,
or
like
whether
the
they're
same
things that you've
sorts
had
of
to
characters or tropes or
research.
conflict, but because their themes and what they care about are different, the story is going to be different.
I have a character
and
who's
I
deaf,
love
so
that.
my uncle's deaf, although he
Yeah, that is
lip
cool.
reads, he doesn't use sign
Right, shall we
language.
move on to Emma Wallis?
And
And she can do
he has
reading.
hearing aids, but they I don't give him very much hearing.
So I'm going to be reading from,
and
this is
I've
my
done
debut
sign
novel.
language classes
It's called
myself.
This Is Not a Love
So
Story. It's
the
a
book, my main character,
contemporary
Scarlett,
fiction.
goes to sign
It
language
is not
classes,
a genre
so
romance.
I very heavily
And I'm going to read you
used sort of
a
the syllabus from the classes that I
think
went
it's
to
chapter 6.
show the lessons
to you
that she
from.
does in the book. But I think
So
kind of
here we go.
all sorts of difficult topics sometimes
when she opened the curtains that morning, Scarlett was sad to see the rain.
Right,
She
them and
liked
just be
autumn with its
completely
crisp air and brown and red
frank and-
leaves which crunched underfoot.
I'm never worried about.
But she's learned to tread carefully on the wet
prettying
pavements
things
when the
up.
leaves turn to
Always
mush.
kind of tell it like it is.
Today she had her
So I
induction
think it's
for the
just kind of a
library.
case of being really.
They've been in the library building yesterday for their computer
straightforward in
clinic,
what you're
where they've
writing
been
and
given the
trying
email
to do
address and
justice
passwords
to
that they would use
something
to log
that
onto the
might be
university
a
network.
difficult topic.
The computer rooms are in the basement,
Definitely.
and one large room held 50
Yeah,
computers
so weirdly,
and bank of printers.
L. Armstrong
Then there were several
asked
smaller
if you knew
rooms which
somebody
held
who's totally
20
deaf, and
computers
you've already
each,
answered that, so
which
that
would
was
normally be
good.
booked for computer-related
She said, I
classes.
found this really interesting
Her
as
course
A, your
didn't have
voice
many
comes
of
through
those,
clearly,
but she
and
would
B,
have to do
I
a
have
research
severe
project,
bilateral
including
hearing loss.
quantifiable data processing
So there
in
you
her
go.
second year. The main computer room was open from 6 to midnight
She
for the
says, I learned
students
a
who
lot,
wanted to study
a
on
lot about
campus
being
around their
totally
lectures
deaf.
and
I lip read,
seminars.
and this mask
It was
thing
staffed
really
by
hinders
final
me.
year
I know a lot
students
of
in red
people are
polo
struggling with
shirts.
that. I
The
nursed
library itself
an
opened at
older
8 and
lady
closed
when
at
I
8,
was redeployed.
and this was staffed by a
An
mixture
older
of
Abbey Ward
librarians
who
and student
literally
helpers.
couldn't
The windows of the
lip read
library were
anyone because
fogged
we
up
weren't
by
allowed
everyone's
to
wet
pull our
clothes
masks
when
down.
Scarlett
So it was
arrived
really,
with
really
Jessica,
difficult. But
her
luckily, I do
induction
know
time
some
slot
BSL,
buddy.
so it was a bit kind of.
It seems
Okay,
like everyone's
I
ducked
can say
inside
some
to escape
things
the
to her,
rain,
but not
Jessica
everything,
said,
and
trying
I
not to let her
can
coat
think
drip
as
onto
well,
the
so that's
floor.
fine.
My
And
induction
having
sheet says meet at the
comes
inquiry
into the
desk.
library with her.
Is that
she's
on the
got
main
two little
floor?
girls who are probably like
I
6
think
and 8,
so.
and
Scarlett looked
she's
round.
deaf. And
This is the main floor, right?
she has her mask on.
When they
her
pushed
little
through the
girls
entrance
do as
barrier
well.
from the lobby into
And
the
we have
library,
a
Jessica's
perfect
face brightened.
screen at the
And she
desk,
waved to
so
someone over
we're
Scarlett's
allowed to
shoulder.
take our masks down if
I
we
see
stand
someone who
one
can
side of the
direct
screen
us.
and the other side.
Scarlett turned to see
But
one of the
she
librarians
tends-
waving back. Unlike
what
student
she's obviously
helpers who wore
started
blue
doing
polo
is
shirts,
she gets
the librarians
her
wore their
little
own
girls
clothes with
to
blue
tell her what
lanyard
somebody's
around their
saying.
neck.
But of course, because
The woman came around the
she's a regular
circulation
that comes
desk
into
to
the
greet
library, I
Jessica.
know that she lip
And Scarlett
reads,
was surprised
and
to
so
see the
I
terrier
know
in the
that
purple
I
coat
need
walking next to her.
to
As they got
pull my
closer,
mask
she
down
could see the
and
coat
let
said,
her lip
"Don't
read,
distract me, I'm
because
working."
otherwise we can't have a
When the
conversation.
librarian stopped,
But
the dog stopped and sat next
it's
to her.
just kind of being aware.
Scarlett,
of
this is Amy. I met
when you're
her when we were
speaking to
trying to get
someone.
Kemi's rug home.
When it's
Jessica
not just
spoke to
facing
Scarlett,
them,
but
it's
faced Amy.
not
And she,
putting
as
your
she
hand
spoke,
over
she
your
used her hands in
mouth
fluid
or
movements that
doing
Scarlett
all
recognised
sorts
as
of the
sign
other
language.
things that people
Hello,
do
Scarlett.
that mean that
Amy had a
somebody
slight
can't
inflection to
lip
her
read
voice, and
properly
Scarlett
from
assumed
you.
this came from learning to speak by watching other people's
Yeah,
lip and tongue
definitely.
movements rather than by
So
sound.
I
As
had
she
a
spoke,
question.
she gave a brief wave
You've
and then touched her little
written
fingers together
books
like
for
she was giving
kids,
herself a little
education
promise.
for kids,
Yeah, a feeling of
different
panic
types of
crept
families.
unbidden into Scarlett's
What
chest.
made you decide
sorry,
to
I
go
don't
a
know any
different
sign
way
language.
and write something a bit more
She
adult?
blurted, embarrassed that she didn't know how to communicate with this smiling
So
lady.
it's cliche to
That's
say it, but
okay,
wanted
I
to
lip
do
read.
something
Just be sure to
different
face me.
from what I'd
Amy
already
tapped
done.
the badge pinned to her
And people
lanyard,
do
which had a
still
picture of a hand cupping an ear
ask
and
me
the
about
words
writing
"Speak
other
clearly" and
children's
"Face me"
books that
printed on it.
fulfill more
Of course, I can do that,
niche
Scarlett said
family
eagerly.
types than the ones that
Jessica,
I've covered
perhaps you
in
could teach me some signs.
my series of books. Which
Scarlett
there
watched,
are, there are either
captivated
10
by
or
the way
11
Amy
of
and
them,
Jessica
but there are
communicated with their
still
hands and
plenty
facial
of
expressions.
family
She felt like
types that
she was
haven't
missing
been
out on something
included
important, but
in
not like she was being
the,
excluded. On
the
the
series
contrary,
of
the others
family
kept up the
types that I
verbal
have
part of
already
the
done.
conversation, so she could
Surely.
follow what they were saying.
There is too many
Ashamed, she
diverse
twisted the strap of her
families
bag.
to write about.
Yeah,
She
I
realised
get
without
lots of
Jessica's
people who
knowledge, she would have
say,
just said
"Have you
hello
done a
to
book that
Amy and then
covers,
awkwardly excused herself, not knowing how to have a conversation with someone different from herself.
ICSI,
As they chatted, she
IVF,
relaxed
or
into
not
the
IVF,
conversation.
but
Jessica asked
the
Amy
less
how long she'd had
invasive
her hearing dog.
version.
She's
of IVF.
adorable.
IUI?
Jessica motioned to
Yeah.
the little dog and touched 2 fingers
Yes,
to her
that
forehead.
one. That's the
What's her
one.
name? This is Peggy. She's
Because
a Lakeland
the book
Terrier.
that I've done.
On hearing her
is
name, Peggy popped her head up, big
IVF
brown eyes looking eagerly
or
up at her mistress.
using
But Amy made a
surrogate,
subtle gesture and she laid
and
down again.
that involves IVF.
She's very well
but
behaved. What else is she
I
trained to do?
didn't
Jessica asked.
do the IUI
She
version,
alerts
so
me to
that's
the
one I
sound,
get
like
asked about
fire
lots.
alarm, the
But that's a
phone,
complete
the
segue away
doorbell,
from
or
the
someone
question you
calling my
actually
name.
asked me, isn't it?
I'm sorry, Scarlett blushed before she asked what she was sure was a
I wanted
stupid
to do something a
question.
bit different, and
I'm sure this is a really
I
ignorant
knew that I
question,
had
but
some
why
stories
does she
actually need to tell you that a phone is ringing,
which I'm sure lots of people
she felt so embarrassed and unworldly.
say.
Her mother was more likely to pull her away from anyone who wasn't just like them. Marie had always been obsessed with surrounding herself with, as she would say, the best people.
Whether it was going to end up
as a
being
child,
a
Scarlett
YA
wasn't allowed to play with the children who lived next door because their dad was Jamaican.
And I suppose
Looking back
I
now,
would
Scarlett
class it as
recognised
being
it for what it was:
a new
small-mindedness
adult
bordering on
fiction. It's
racism.
not YA.
Even
it's
then, several sex
when she didn't
scenes
have
in
the
it.
words to express how she felt,
and
it had made her feel uneasy.
It was almost at the point where
Unfortunately, her mother was her own
was about to write a sex
social
scene, and I
cues.
thought to myself,
Marie
this
sculpted
is
her
where I
daughter
need to
as an
make the
effigy of her own
decision. Is
beliefs.
this going to be YA,
I can just
or
imagine
is
what
this
Mum
going to be
would
an
say
adult
about
novel?
Amy.
And
Well, I
obviously
used
I just wanted to write
to use
sex
the
scenes
text phone
too much.
system,
So
but that was so
it
slow.
is-
Now I
it is an
mostly
adult
use video
fiction.
calls like FaceTime.
So,
I feel so lucky to be living in a time when we have so many communication
Julie, have you got any
technologies.
questions?
Not
for
long
Emma?
ago, my deafness would
Oh,
have
yes.
completely isolated
So
me.
I
She patted
was
her
quite
pocket in
excited
the
when I was
universal
listening to
action
this
of
and
looking
I
for her phone,
and I
and
saw
said,
heard the dog
when I use my
turning
mobile,
up,
I can feel
and
the
I was
vibration
wondering,
alert if it's
does
here in my
the
pocket,
assistant dog have
or
an
if I'm wearing my
important part in the
smartwatch.
plot?
But if I leave it in my coat or on the table, Peggy will
She
come and tell me if
crops
it's
up
ringing.
quite a few
At work,
times.
there's
I
normally
wouldn't
someone
say
else
she
to answer the
has a
phone. But I
pivotal
have
plot
video
role, but she has
conferencing on the
some
computer,
good
so
kind
faculty
of
members can
comic
talk to me
moments
about research
that
inquiries.
she helps.
Wow, I
with.
never would have thought what a
and
difference something
there's-
like FaceTime would make to someone's
yeah,
life.
I'd say
That's wild.
because
That's
every
right.
time
There are so many things we
Amy's
use every
in a
day that were
scene,
originally
but
invented as solutions for
her
people with
dog is in
disabilities.
the scene as well.
Did you
because
know
she
the first
doesn't go anywhere
typewriter,
without
the
her hearing
precursor
help.
to the modern
So
keyboard, was invented in the early
allows
1800s
for
for an Italian
some
countess who was
comic
blind.
moments.
It was so
or
she
some
could write
moments
private
where
letters without
the
having to
dog
dictate
helps
them to another
Amy
person.
realise
Also,
that something
audiobooks
is
were first
happening and
invented
kind
for
of
soldiers who lost their vision
there's
because of mustard
literally a
gas
scene where
attacks in
she
World War One.
links her to
That's amazing, Scarlett
kind
said. Amy's passion for
what's
the topic
happening
was
in the
evident
plot.
as she
So
spoke. I wish I could find
she's-
something that I was that
she
passionate
doesn't
about.
have kind of a pivotal
There we are.
plot, but she's
Excellent.
definitely
That sounds really
she's
interesting.
definitely a character in the
So
book.
it's a work of fiction, but it's not a romance.
Do you think your books are always
that
going
is
to have
right.
dogs in them?
Yeah. So is there any
Maybe.
kind of love interesty
Maybe.
type thing in it at all, or
I
is
think,
it just
So dogs are probably the animal that
I
kind
don't
of
want to give
know the
spoilers
most
away
about.
because I don't want to spoil it for
So if
anyone
I'm
that
going to
doesn't
include
read
a
it,
pet, it's probably going to
hasn't read it yet.
You said,
But
I was really
there
interested, and you said that
is
when you
women
wrote this
loving
book, you
women
weren't really thinking
stuff
about
in it.
genre
There are some sex
or
scenes
anything
in
like
it,
that.
but
it
it is
I
not
hear people
a
say that about their first book, and I'm like,
romance.
wow, that
Fair
is so
enough.
cool
Not
that
a
you
love
just
story.
have a story.
The title
that you just
isn't
want to get
ironic,
it out
but
there.
perhaps to mention it.
How about your
thinking it's
second book? Are
ironic.
you thinking more about genre, or are
I think
you just again just letting
Phoebe
it happen
Williamson
how
had
it
a similar
happens?
issue with Pink,
Um,
didn't she? When
So
like
my next
this, people thought
book,
it was a romance, but it
it's
wasn't, and it
plotted
literally
out
didn't
as
say
being a
anywhere that it was
romance.
romance. And yeah,
Um,
people complained, and she was like, "But it's not a romance. It doesn't say it is."
I understand.
I
I think
definitely
now
wrote
about
it
the
before I
different
knew
rules
about
of the
genre
different
rules
genres
and
and
the
how you
expectations
need
of
to kind
readers
follow
and things.
your
So
plot points.
hopefully
And
people will give it a chance and
I
it
definitely feel
well
like
received
I'm
for
more
what
of
it
a
actually
rule
is rather
breaker,
than what people think it
and
is.
I kind
Yeah.
of want to rebel against.
So Emma
having
Nichols
these
is back.
set in stone
She has a question.
plot points.
Hi Emma.
Emma says, Emma,
And
you
I went
tackle some really
to,
tricky issues in your work,
Robin
and you do
Brady's
so
writing
beautifully. How
retreat in
challenging are
October,
they to write?
and I did some work with them about kind
I
of
think it
plotting out
depends
my
on
next
kind
book.
of what the issues are
And
and if they're things that you
They
kind of have
definitely showed me
experience of
a
in
lot
depth,
of sort of
or whether they're things that
things
you've
that
had
I
to
can now see
research.
what I might have been able to write
and
kind of 20
for-
or
in
30,000
this book where
words. I can
I have
now
a character
see
who's
that
deaf,
I can
so
make
my
this
uncle's
book
deaf, although he
novel
lip
length
reads, he doesn't use sign
because
language.
of all these different points
and
that
he has hearing
that
aids, but they
traditionally
don't give
go
him very
into
much
romance.
hearing.
And
He
so I
mainly
think the
relies
book will
on
be
lip
a bit
reading.
different from what I
And
first
I've done sign
envisaged.
language classes myself. So in the book, my
will
main
be a
character
bit more of a
Scarlett goes to
traditional
sign language classes.
romance
So
genre,
I
think.
very heavily
Unless I completely have a
used
meltdown and it
sort of the
becomes literary
syllabus
fiction
from the
again.
classes that I went to
You never
to
know.
show
Who knows
the
where these
lessons
things
that
take
she
us.
does in the book.
I'm going to go back to Julie.
But I think
Catherine
kind
Lane
of
arrived late.
all
She
sorts of
apologises.
difficult topics.
She's asking,
Sometimes
do you
you
believe
just-
in ghosts?
you just need to
And
kind
were
of
you worried
get
that
in
this
there and
subject might put off some
write
of your
them and just
readers?
be completely frank.
Well,
And
I haven't had paranormal elements in
I'm
my
never
book
worried
before,
about
but
sort of
as
prettying
I said, the
things up.
ghosts
I
in this book
always kind of tell it like
are
it is.
really in the
So I think
periphery.
it's just kind of a
They
case of
turn
being
up in
really
photographs. Nobody ever actually
straightforward
sees
with
them.
what you're writing and
well, they
trying
do
to
see
do
them, but
justice
they're
to
fake.
something
That's
that
not a spoiler.
might be a
because
difficult
Henriette
topic.
is not a real medium.
Definitely.
Um,
Yeah, so
and they
weirdly,
turn out- the ghosts in
L.
this book are
Armstrong
really more
asked
of a
if you knew
metaphor
somebody who's
than a
totally
real
deaf,
thing.
and you've already answered that, so that was
They symbolize
good.
love and they
She
symbolize
said, I
loss,
found this really
and that's pretty
interesting as A,
explicit
your
in the
voice
book.
comes through clearly,
It
and
says
B,
it
I have
straight out.
severe
So I
bilateral
wasn't
hearing
worried
loss.
because it's not a
So there you go.
paranormal, but it's just a story where ghosts appear.
She says, I learned a lot
It has
about
some
being
scary
totally
bits in
deaf.
it,
I
but
lip
not
read,
that
and this
scary.
mask
It's
thing
more of
really
a
hinders me. I know a lot
ghostly
of people
story
are
than a
struggling
ghost
with that.
story.
I nursed an older lady
I'm
when
trying
I
to think
was
of what was the beginning
redeployed
of the question.
on an older adult ward who literally couldn't
You're
lip read anyone because we weren't allowed
do
to
I
pull our
believe in
masks
ghosts?
down.
Yes,
So
I
it
do
was
believe in
really, really
ghosts. And,
difficult. But luckily, I do
didn't
know some
always believe in
BSL,
ghosts,
so it was a bit
but
kind
I
of
have
okay.
encountered
I
ghosts a
can
few
say some
times.
things to her, but
And
not everything, and I
I
can
encountered ghosts while
finger
I was
spell, so
writing
that's
this
fine.
book.
I have
But
a
yeah,
customer
I went on
who
a
comes
writing
into the
retreat
library with her.
at
She's
Pondon
got two
Hall
little
in
girls who are
Yorkshire, which
probably
is this
like 6 and
wonderful
8, and
bed and
she's
breakfast
deaf,
place,
and
which is thought to be
she
the house that
has her
Wuthering
mask
Heights
on. Her
was set
little
at.
girls do as well,
It served
and we
as
have a
inspiration for
perspex
both Wuthering Heights
screen at
and
the desk, so we're
Great.
allowed to take our masks down if we
And one
stand
night
one
I
side of the
stayed
screen and
in
the other side.
box
But
bed
she
bedroom,
tends.
which is
What she's
where
obviously
they
started
think
doing is she
the
gets
opening
her
scenes of
little
Wuthering Heights are
girls to
set, where
tell her
Kathy's
what
ghost
somebody's
knocks
saying.
on the door,
But of course, because
on the window,
she's a
sorry,
regular that
asking to
comes
be
into
let
the
in.
library, I know
And
that she lip reads,
that room is
and
known
so
to me.
I know that
And
I
was
need
working in that room.
to
And my first night
pull
in
my
that
mask
room,
down
I
and
woke up
let
in the middle
her
of the night
lip
by
read,
having,
because otherwise
the
we can't
covers
have a
pulled off the bed.
conversation. But
yeah,
and
it's just kind of
sat
being
up in my
aware
room.
of
I,
when you're
hi,
speaking to someone,
I just like
when
to sleep now.
it's not
so
just facing them, it's
thank
not
you. I need to sleep now.
putting your
And
hand
the
over
ghosts
your
left me alone.
mouth
But
or
later on, as I
doing
was
all
writing
sorts
in
of the other
that room,
things that
this book
people
about ghosts,
do that mean that somebody can't lip
the
read
volume, I was
properly
playing
from
some
you.
classical music, and the volume on my
yeah,
music kept
definitely.
getting turned down.
So I had a
the
question.
ghost doesn't like
You've
classical music. And
written
at one point,
books for kids,
Mhm.
education for kids,
Yeah.
maybe
different types of
maybe.
families.
And well,
Yeah.
the thing is, the
What
owner of the house
made
really
you
is really into
decide
punk.
to go a different way and
Apparently
write
the ghost
something
loves
a bit more
punk,
adult?
so
Fair enough.
who knows? And also,
it's
one time
cliche
it
to
touched
say it, but
my
I
heart.
wanted to do something different from what I'd already done.
But
And people do
generally, I
still
would just talk to it,
ask me about writing other children's books that
thank you for letting me use
fulfill
your room.
more niche
I'm sorry, my
family
music was too
types than the ones that I've
and
covered in
it was fine.
my
I
series
wasn't
of
frightened.
books, which there are either 10 or 11 of them,
Cool.
but there are still
We
plenty
have
of
a
family
question for
types
both
that
of you from
haven't
Bev
been
Joy.
included
Emma, maybe first.
in
Which
the
authors, if any, influence
the series
your
of
writing?
family types that I have already done.
Not going to hit them all, are you? There is too many diverse families to write about.
Yeah, I get lots of people who say, "Have you done a book that covers
follow more than one
it
character
it
through
it's
the story?" So
ICSI,
I find
IVF, or
with
not
a lot
IVF,
of
but the
Lesfic,
less invasive
you have your two
version
main
of
characters,
IUI?
and they're in
Yeah.
every scene of
Yes,
the
that
book.
one. That's the
And
one.
I really like it when
Because
you
the
actually
book that I've
follow
done
the
is
secondary characters as well.
IVF,
And I
or
think that's probably what I've tried
using
to
a surrogate,
in
and
I Love
that
Story.
involves IVF.
And
but
one of
I
the books,
didn't do the IUI version, so that's one that I get asked about lots. But that's a complete segue away from the question you actually asked me. So yeah, so I wanted to do something a bit different, and I knew that I had some stories in me that I could tell, which I'm sure lots of people who write books will say. And with this book, I wrote quite a large portion of it, wondering whether it was going to end up being a YA novel rather than adult. And I suppose I would probably class it as being a new adult fiction. It's not YA, it's got several sex scenes in it. And it was almost at the point where I got to the point where I was about to write a sex scene, and I thought to myself, this is where I need to make the decision. Is this going to be YA or is this going to be an adult novel? And obviously I just wanted to write the sex scene too much. So it is an adult fiction.
Extraordinary.
So, yeah.
And I did read Affinity while I was reading this.
Julie, have you got any questions for Emma?
Oh yes. So I was quite excited when I was listening to this, and I heard the dog turning up, and I was wondering, does the assistant dog have an important part in the plot?
she crops up quite a few times. I wouldn't say she has a pivotal plot role, but she has some good kind of comic moments that she helps with. And there's, yeah, I'd say because every time Amy's in a scene in the book, her dog is in the scene as well, because she doesn't go anywhere without her hearing dog. So it allows for sort of some comic moments, or some moments where the dog helps Amy realise that something is happening, and kind of there's literally a scene where she leads her to kind of what's happening in the plot. So she doesn't have kind of a pivotal plot, but she's definitely a character in the book.
Do you think your books are always going to have dogs in them?
Maybe. I think dogs are probably the animal that I kind of know the most about. So if I'm going to include a pet, it's probably going to be a dog.
You said, I was really interested, and you said that when you wrote this book, you weren't really thinking about genre or anything like that. I hear people say that about their first book, and I'm like, wow, that is so cool that you just have a story that you just want to get it out there. How about your second book? Are you thinking more about genre, or are you just letting it happen how it happens?
So my next book, it's plotted out as being a romance. I understand more now about the different rules of the different genres and how you need to kind of follow your plot points, and I definitely feel like I'm more of a rule breaker, and I kind of want to rebel against having these set in stone plot points. And I went to Robin and Bray's writing retreat in October, and I did some work with them about kind of plotting out my next book, and they've definitely shown me a lot of sort of things that I can now see what I might have been able to write kind of 20 or 30,000 words. I can now see that I can make this book novel length because of all these different points that traditionally should go into a romance. And so I think the book will be a bit different from what I first envisaged, but it will be a bit more of a traditional romance genre, I think, unless I completely have a meltdown and it becomes literary fiction again.
You never know. Who knows where these things take us.
Exactly.
I'm going to go back to Julie. Catherine Lane arrived late. She apologises. She's asking, do you believe in ghosts? And were you worried that this subject might put off some of your readers?
Well, I haven't had paranormal elements in my book before, but as I said, the ghosts in this book are really in the periphery. They turn up in photographs. Nobody ever actually sees them. Well, they do see them, but they're fake. That's not a spoiler, because Henriette is not a real medium. And they turn up. The ghosts in this book are really more of a metaphor than a real thing. They symbolize love and they symbolize loss, and that's pretty explicit in the book. It says it straight out. So I wasn't worried, because it's not a paranormal book. It's just a story where ghosts appear. It has some scary bits, I think, but not that scary. It's more of a ghostly story than a ghost story. I'm trying to think of what was the beginning of the question. Sorry. Do you believe in ghosts? Oh, do I believe in ghosts? Yes, I do believe in ghosts. And I didn't always believe in ghosts, but I have encountered ghosts a few times. And in fact, I encountered ghosts while I was writing this book. I went on a writing retreat at Pondon Hall in Yorkshire, which is this wonderful bed and breakfast place, which is thought to be the house that Wuthering Heights was set at. It's sort of the inspiration for both Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange. And one night I stayed in the box bedroom, which is where they think the opening scenes of Wuthering Heights are set, where Kathy's ghost knocks on the door, on the window, sorry, asking to be let in. And that room is known to be haunted. And I was working in that room. And my first night in that room, I woke up in the middle of the night by having the covers pulled off the bed. And I sort of sat up and went, oh, hi, I just like to sleep now. So thank you, I need to sleep now. And the ghost left me alone. But later on, as I was writing in that room, this book about ghosts, the volume, I was playing some classical music, and the volume on my music kept on getting turned down. So the ghost doesn't like classical music. And at one point,
loud music, or just has really sensitive hearing.
Maybe. And the thing is, the owner of the house is really into punk.
Oh,
and apparently the ghost loves punk. So
fair enough.
Who knows? And also, one time it touched my back. I felt that. But generally, I mean, I would just talk to it, and I would say, hi, thank you for letting me use your room. I'm sorry my music was too loud, and it was fine. I wasn't frightened.
Cool. Okay. We have a question for both of you from Bev Joy. Emma, maybe first. Which authors, if any, influence your writing?
I really like stories where you kind of follow more than one character through the story. So I find with a lot of Lesfic particularly, you have your two main characters and they're in every scene of the book. And I really like it when you actually follow the secondary characters as well. And I think that's probably what I've tried to emulate in This Is Not a Love Story. And one of the books I would say that I really enjoy, and I've read it quite a few times, which I feel has this kind of writing style, is Galveston Swept Away by Linda Christ. And yeah, I really enjoy that kind of style of storytelling where you get a more kind of round view of all of the characters, not just the main characters.
Okay, yeah, interesting. Julie, same question.
Obviously with this book, Sarah Waters. I mean, so much Sarah Waters. Sarah Waters, like 24/7, just completely love.
Is it Infinity with the ghosts?
Yeah, that is actually my least favorite Sarah Waters. Really, Fingersmith, which is just wonderful. I mean, I don't want to give away the ending of Affinity, but the ending of Affinity. But Fingersmith, and Tipping the Velvet, the Victorian ones, just extraordinary. And I did read Affinity while I was reading this because I didn't want to copy Sarah Waters. This is pretty different. And Bray was mentioning Ursula Le Guin has been hugely influential in my writing, not so much with this book, but with my previous book, The Two Lives of Louis and Louise. I was really influenced by her. I think her writing is so beautiful and generous and inclusive and just gorgeous, and her plots are amazing. I think she's, even though I don't write science fiction and fantasy, which is what she wrote, just her whole attitude towards storytelling just blows me away.
Excellent. Well, I think that's all we've got time for in this slot. Thank you very much, Emma and Julie, for your wonderful readings. Again, as I said in the last slot of readings, two really different books, which is awesome. I like variety. And yeah, go buy them because they sound cool. Our next panel is in 20 minutes and it will be about travel.
And hosted by me.
And hosted by Emma, yay!